Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be talking about divorce, remarriage, and blended families. This chapter to me kind of brings everything together because it forces you to think about how family is a major institution of our society. So when you think about the major institutions of society, again, you have the family, you have the economy, politics and government, the education system, cultural factors like religion. All of these structure our lives. It structures the way we think, it structures the social context, it structures the way society is created, the way groups of people interact. And then all of these structures affect each other. So again, when we're talking about divorce, for example, you have to look at the association between family and economics and interpersonal relations and all these different variables to really understand that. And so when I get into this chapter, what I tend to realize is there is so much to study. So when it comes to studying a major institution like the family, it would take, a bazillion studies to really cover all of the dynamic experiences of people in these particular situations, such as children in single parent households versus children in married couple households versus children in heterosexual married couple houses, and then children in same-sex married couple houses, and then do they have divergent experiences? And so when we're talking about the sociology of family, again, we are focused on the social context, and we look at the variables like race and ethnicity and religion and sexual orientation and family structure and dynamics within people. But again, a lot of this also has to do with the individuals, which means on the psychological level, the way people think and the effect of families on cognition and the effect of the cultural socialization process on people, and then how does being socialized into a specific family and a specific social class and a specific race or ethnicity and religion, ideology and cultural value systems and beliefs, how does all of this affect your life? And so, we're in one class, so it would be impossible to cover all of this in one day. But again, the goal of a lot of this class is to introduce you to all these dynamic things that we can study in sociology, but especially when it comes to studying the family, which is a major institution of society. Think about the bureaucracy attached to the family when it comes to the government. It's a massive system from children's services, etc. And so, there's a lot to study here. But today, again, we're going to be focusing on divorce, remarriage, and blended families. But again, when we start thinking about the effects of divorce, we have no choice but to delve into psychological factors like trauma on children and depression and, things like that. So just to give you a quick introduction of how dynamic all of this can truly be. Okay, so for the children's sake, and this is what the book titled the first chapters. I put it in there for us, but again, what is in the best interest of the children? We have to think about, do people stay together in families and stay married for the children? And the book says commonly, yes, that's a huge factor that weighs into it. And realize that, the effect of having children on couple status is very dynamic. And if you kind of ask in general, how does children affect the relationship between the people that are married or cohabitating or in a relationship? And you can find that just having children is associated with both positive and negative outcomes, okay? And so again, having children is wonderful and great on the heart, but it's also a lot of time and it's involving and work, and it can have all kinds of negative effects too, both, when it comes to economic constraints, for example, or psychological factors like the way you think. And so when we're looking at divorce and remarriage and blended families, we're always asking questions like, how is it associated with the people's cognitions and emotions and motivations psychologically? How is it associated with their socioeconomic status and ability to rise up the social class and generate good health outcomes and educational outcomes and things along those lines? So what is in the best interest of the children is, And what you're going to find with this chapter, there's no clear-cut answer. Because again, when you think about divorce, what about children that are in abusive situations? Can a divorce help that situation? But there's negative factors in divorce, like what if a child doesn't see one of the parents as often as they used to, and those parents are close, for example? Does that cause different forms of trauma? So when you're talking about things like divorce, there's a lot of pros and cons. And again, if you were to just think in your own mind all the reasons that people get divorced and married, and why do people break up, and why do people stay together, you're going to find there's a ton of various reasons. And again, this is why we can go out and do qualitative studies and ask questions like, how is divorce associated with your cognitions and overall sense of well-being and happiness and things along those lines. But does divorce affect children? Of course, but then again, that's the goal of divorce, is to minimize any of the harm that is caused from that by good conflict resolution and communication and all these other things that you can do, such as teaching coping skills and things along those lines. And again, from a psychological standpoint, it's a big focus because you have to look at how the family structure and stability within the family and parenting styles and the way you're raised is also associated with cognitive factors. And so when we're talking about divorce and how it affects children and the people that are getting divorced, again, we have to recognize this is a very dynamic process. The old song, like breaking up is hard to do. But again, some parts of breakup can be really great for people and really open them up to new situations and really make something that wasn't good a lot better. But then some aspects of divorce, such as financial hardship or trauma imposed on children. So you have to kind of look at it from all the different angles and all the different reasons. But for right now, the long-term increase in divorce and remarriage in the U.S. has kind of taken a change. So in the 1960s, again, associated with all kinds of factors, such as just liberal attitudes and people's changing of hearts and minds and changing of the laws and the reduction of religious power over people's lives and the introduction of the state intervention in families. You started to see a high divorce rate that definitely peaked around 1980. But then after 1980, it's been slowly going down. So even though we've had this long-term increase in divorce and remarriage, and you still see this commonly among older cohorts, especially those over 50, younger cohorts in modern times have actually started to suggest, and by their own actions, that this increase in divorce is actually changing. And that could be due to many factors, such as, prolonging getting married, maybe living together. That has pros and cons. Being together longer before they get married, waiting longer to have children, because again, children can cause stress in life, so all these different factors, of course, plus dozens more are associated with the decline, but we'll get into that a little bit later. But again, divorce and blended families and remarriages, again, this is all contributing to the family type diversity and inequality between families that we discussed a lot in the last section, and we'll talk about a little bit more next week with work and family. But again, the family type diversity, this idea that families are a heterosexual couple that are married with children, again, that I've been stressing this whole class, that that's become more of a minority standard. Because you have heterosexual children with, you have, blended families where you have step parents and stepchildren all living together. You have same-sex families, you have cohabitating families, you have single-parent households. And so again, in modern times, you have to think about all the different family types and then how all the different family types are associated with all the sociological variables like race and sex and religion and things along those lines. So again, very complex is what we're stressing now. But again, we're just doing a general overview of divorce, some of the pros and cons of divorce, the changes, the social changes toward increasing divorce rates and, marriages and remarriages and the blending of families and all these other unique factors that are going on in modern times. So the book opens up talking about church and state. stating that historically religious institutions, again, religion is a structure of culture. So really cultural institutions have lost the power over relationships in the U.S. And what you found is that, again, since the Civil War, the state has been increasingly intervening in the family and then constructing policies and procedures for how to structure the family. Again, so why do people go to the courthouse and get married in front of a religious person, for example? Why do you kind of get married twice, And so you still kind of have that blend where you still have the cultural influences and the state influences going on currently, but we've definitely had a rise in the state intervention when it comes to marriages, especially ones that have been legalized. And so your book breaks it out into a couple definitions of marital dissolution, again, separating or divorce, but was never legal. Separation is separating into different households, and then divorce, again, the state-sanctioned legal dissolution. And again, rules of dissolution vary by culture, vary by country, vary by, all these different factors. So again, the methods and procedures in one place are going to vary wherever you are. So we have to open our diverse, book and learn about all different cultures and different government types and figure out the policies and procedures. And again, that's a whole another chapter for a much more global diversity conversation. But again, just recognize that, these rules vary by culture. In some cultures, arranged marriages are still very highly popular, whereas in an individualistic culture like America, is that a taboo, for example? Do we just, marry for love and who we want to marry, or is it more political, for example? And so all these different various things to think about. But annulment defined as a marriage that was never valid. And then the book talks about how the marriage through the state and then the marriage through the church, and this marriage in general has always had this basis of legitimizing children. And the book talks about Henry VIII going all the way back to killing his brides until he could have a son for succession, and then that never worked out, so we ended up with Queen Elizabeth I. So honestly, that worked out great. But divorce, remarriage, and same-sex marriage, again, have historically been taboo. And again, we are all socialized into a cultural way of life, and that culture structures our actions, our beliefs, our ideologies, who we marry, the type of people we marry, what the rules are, what the norms are, what's acceptable. So it's only been in the last 50, 60 years that this opening of the door of constructing what is acceptable, has changed. And so when that that's why I said, I use the word liberal, not meaning like it was a bunch of Democrats, but like the book talks about the 1960s of this more liberal, more, positive attitude toward things like divorce and remarriage and same-sex couples, and how that's perfectly acceptable because it doesn't cause any harm. But, at the same time, all things have some consequences, such as divorce, remarriage, and same sex. So again, a couple breaking up doesn't really what does it really cause harm to? But again, it can't affect the children and the people that are involved in it, but it doesn't hurt society in any way. You know what I mean? So it's just the usual kind of stuff. So, what was historically taboo and would get you ostracized from society and then, banned from ever going to some supernatural place, in modern times we've reconstructed that. So divorce rates and trends. So just to give it some demographics, the divorce rates are not always measured in states. So again, we just have to take our samples and do the best with what we can. But from the gathering of data, the book talks about all these different ways to be able to calculate divorce rates and things like that. But just as a general average number, the book states that 46% of marriages end in divorce, 3 times as many since 1960. And the book talks about, in the 1960s, this idea of the divorce revolution. And that's what I keep talking about, where our attitudes kind of shifted and people's attitudes toward divorce changed. And with that social change and cultural ideology, you start to see the rise in divorces. But the divorce rate over the last 3 decades has finally started to decline for younger cohorts. In the book, again, associates this likely to educational attainment, economic stability, and it looks at factors like social class status, meaning that people in the middle and the upper classes tend to have lower divorce rates than those in the lower classes. And again, much of that has to do with simply financial stability and things along those lines. Again, socioeconomic status has an effect on your overall happiness of your marriage. And you might not think about how much money you have and the neighborhood you live in and things like that being associated with marriage. But again, those are all associated with a reduction in stress. And a reduction in stress can demonstrate a positive aspects on marriage, okay? So again, are the effects of divorce positive, negative, or both? And that's the open-ended question that there's no real answer to one way or another, because there's so many different variables you have to consider and so many ways to look at it. And so can you say that the increase in divorce rates has resulted in a instability of the family structure? You know, look around you and look at families, look at single parent households. Do you see a decline in the family and a breakdown in the structure of family? And is that having negative social consequences? Or is that just everyday life and that's just the way it is? Or is that just opening up the doors for people that, you know, just want to be single parents, or people that just, you know, were unhappy in their previous relationship and they just want to, you know, be single parents, you know? So there's all these different ways of looking at it. So you can't say whether divorce is positive, negative, or both. It's a multi-dynamic, multi-variables to be considering. It's just so much going on. But there's no one way to look at it. But that's why sociology is the best answer to a lot of these questions when it comes to a way of perceiving divorce and the effects on society, because we're going to look at all these different variables and then we're going to just present them and say, here's all the different ways of looking at it, you know? So what is associated with divorce? Again, I like to take that biopsychosocial approach. Think about your relationships you're in now. How much of that has to do with biological factors such as attraction? Okay? And then how much of it has to do with cognitive and emotional and motivational factors and the way you feel and the way you think, right? That's psychological. And then how much of it has to do with the social context? Are you living the life you want to? Are you enjoying that interaction with each other? Are you guys, you know, having the best life ever, you know, or are you just kind of miserable with the way things are and you want to change? And so again, you have to look at the biopsychosocial approach to say what's associated with divorce. And then again, the main sociological variables are going to be things like, you know, is race associated with your divorce, or your ethnicity, or socioeconomic status? And the answer is yes, all of the above are then associated with divorce, okay? And the book even comments on cultural things like religion. Like if people have divergent religious beliefs, that can be associated with divorce. And the book uses religion to say positive and negative at the same time. Like maybe it's shameful, but at the same time, if they have differing views, you know? So the book states that it's higher for people with less education, African and Native Americans for race, so that's educational attainment, race, age, people that are younger when they get married are more likely to get divorced. And again, those people that are married before, again, the book also talks about, again, with education gives you higher socioeconomic status. Those with higher socioeconomic status are less likely to get divorced. So again, if you kind of think about it, you know, how much is your education and your job and your socioeconomic status and your race and your age and all these factors associated with it? Well, they are, you know. So that's why we kind of look at those main sociological variables to give us some social answers. But again, that doesn't give us all the answers, because socioeconomic status doesn't completely account for happiness. Happiness is more than just the money you make, but the money you make and how much money you have is associated with happiness. Sadly to say, but we live in a capitalist society, and so if you have that socioeconomic status, you have a lot more psychological, less stress, right? So less psychological stress. People separate more when cohabitating than marrying, and so again, cohabitating is also a reason for the book suggesting what's associated with divorce, because again, when you're cohabitating, you have a chance to live with that people. You might have lived with them for a long time. By the time you actually get married, maybe you've had a chance to really be with that person. And so there is some association to say that cohabitating and then waiting a little bit longer before you get married can be associated with it. But then again, cohabitation can also be associated with breaking up. because you then have that chance to be with that person, you know what I mean? And maybe it didn't go the way you wanted it to. The book also points out, again, those interpersonal relationship dynamics. And again, relationships themselves are a biopsychosocial process of your body and responding, the way you think, and then your overall social context and everything in it. So again, divorce is associated with both positive and negative outcomes. You have to look at divorce. You can't say it's good or bad. You know, and the book talks about that. You have to just kind of look at it from all the different ways of perceiving it. The book also talks about, just to conclude this, the idea of the income effect for women in relationships. Again, the book states that giving women the chance to go get a job is not in itself associated with, you know, more people getting a divorce. But what is associated is this income effect on relationships. Again, that the higher socioeconomic status people tend to have, the lower the marriage rates are. And again, I just point to the ideas of stress imposed by socioeconomic factors that then affect the relationship themselves. But just like children, like we were talking earlier, it's not children themselves that necessarily, you know, are associated with stress, but raising children can be stressful, especially if you don't have that kind of support that socioeconomic status and family dynamics give you. The consequences of divorce, again, you have factors like mental health. And the book talked a couple chapters ago that people who are married tend to score higher on these, you know, mental health well-being tests, including areas of happiness. But again, the book also talks about how some people get a divorce, and because they got a divorce, now they're a little bit happier than they were before. However, it does demonstrate that, you know, being married is associated with the longer-term brain rewards, over the lifespan kind of perspectives of people is associated with positive attributes of happiness. But again, so much of that has to do with simply fulfilling those social bond needs that all people have. Okay, because again, when you're married, you are with someone, you're connected to something, right? So again, just being tied to any group is associated with an influx in happiness. And so, again, the book talks about socioeconomic status, and it contributes to the feminization of poverty. And again, you got to think about some factors as a consequence upon women. For example, because we live in a society that inequitably pays men compared to women, and so men tend to make a little bit more money, and so they tend to be a little bit more financially better well off during divorces than females. And then if females have more childcare roles because of the court systems and all these other factors. But again, just being not paid that much and having children can have a major effect on you. And historically, females tend to be more in the child-rearing position while making less financial, you know, money. So then that all contributed to the feminization of poverty. Again, and once you get stuck in the lower class and you have the stress imposed by having to raise children and not being make a lot of money, how does that affect you in general? And again, another thing the book talks about is who gets the kids, you know, and how is the legal system associated with that? And there's a really good section in your book that talks about that. But again, the idea of who gets the kids in modern times, but what most studies show, again, is that, like, the equal separation, spending time with both the parents, you know, and everyone contributing financially, and just leveling out the playing field. This really makes it a lot easier on everyone. But the most negative consequences that the book talks about, again, are again on the individuals getting divorced, but also the children. And so children's well-being is affected by divorce, including, you know, the stress, age effects. Older children tend to have a little bit more stressful reactions than younger people. Interpersonal conflict, spending less time with their parents, getting less energy from their parents, losing contact with their parents, witnessing the conflict, again, if there's breakup or just conflict with new relationships or whatever it might be. Residential moves, school transitions, economic hardships, behavior and school problems, permanent emotional change, having to define new roles and identity within the family and within the social context that may have changed because of such like a residential move, for example. And so again, any change in any structure for children can be stressful. And so that's why, again, children enjoy that stability and that love, and that's all they really need. But, you know, when that stability or that structure changes and everybody has to adjust to that, it can cause stress. but some positive thing the book says to help to talk about it. Again, helping with coping skills, making sure the family has enough socioeconomic resources to withstand the divorce, attentive parenting, really focusing more, reducing conflict situations that are both experienced and within the family, and then the ability to see both parents can be really effective. So regarding remarriage and blended families, again, most people that divorce tend to remarry, which again contributes to family type diversity. Because not only do you have, the single parents and the heterosexual and the same-sex couples and the cohabitating couples, but you also have the married couples that are now remarried, and then you have the addition of step-parents and siblings and half-siblings, and again, all these dynamic processes that are associated with modern families. I mean, families come in very diverse shapes, sizes, and types, okay? But what the book really focuses on is this boundary ambiguity when it comes to remarriage and blended families. And everybody had their pre-established roles, but now there's like this new family. What does everybody do? Who's supposed to do what? And so those are all the new questions that definitely come up. And these are new questions that are coming up because this wasn't a historical trend that's been going on for centuries. Again, this idea of being able to get a divorce and start a new family and remarry is a brand new concept, and it's almost in a social experiment, something that's, for the first time happening in society that's never really happened before. And so from a sociological perspective, there's a lot to account for, a lot of different variables to think about, and how do all these variables affect each type of family. And it's incredibly complex, okay? So I'm hoping you guys are starting to see some of the complex variables that we need to be thinking about when studying marriage and family. Again, we're looking at various marriage or various family types. We're looking at all the sociological variables like race, sex, gender, culture, the socialization process, social stratification, the effects of biological sex and sexual orientation, and the media and education system, and just all of these various factors, and along with the legal system and how that is associated with the family. So it's a really rich subject, and I'm glad we're delving in slowly but surely into some of these extraordinarily interesting concepts. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful day.